The Galactic Court hung above a dead blue star, a ring of glass, and judgment. The narrator described the hush that followed the order to kneel. Alex Mercer lowered his head as shackles hummed. Magistrate Vorlix said, "Humanity will be erased." The words fell like iron across a billion watching feeds. Commander Lena Ortiz said, "Stand down and accept mercy." The chamber brightened as evidence halos spun around Alex. Dr. Marcus Hale said, "This is necessary for peace." Alex tasted blood and dust, and did not look away. A whisper drifted from an unlit arch. Elyra said, "They are not only judging you." The court stilled as the star pulsed and fear wore the shape of law. Alex said, "If this is justice, why does it need a mask?" Vorlix's crest tilted, as if listening for a crack in resolve. The silence pressed like water over a drowning city. The narrator traced the path of accusation as images stacked like stones. Vorlix said, "Your species learned nothing from fire." Alex kept counting the breaths between lies. Lena Ortiz said, "Confession spares the innocent." The feeds lingered on burning cities and broken oaths. Alex remembered a doorway blown inward and a hand he could not hold. Marcus Hale said, "This spares our future." The hall smelled of metal and ozone and old grief. Elyra watched as if remembering her own ruins. Alex said, "Show all of it, not just the wounds you prefer." The star flickered, and the court pretended it was steady. The narrator held the court's breath as a planet's memory was weighed. Alex said, "Mercy without truth is theater." Marcus Hale smiled like a closed door. Vorlix said, "The record is complete." A child's lullaby leaked from a ruined archive and stilled the tears. Lena Ortiz said, "Do not make this harder." The chains lifted Alex to his feet with a servo groan. Elyra said, "Records can be curated." The crowd rustled like rain against glass. Alex said, "Then let the galaxy see the hands arranging the frames." The star dimmed, and the silence deepened. The narrator let the lullaby fade into a hum that matched the star. Vorlix said, "Sentence stands unless counterproof." Alex stared at the fractures webbing the dome. Marcus Hale said, "There is none." Lena Ortiz shifted as if carrying a secret weight. Elyra said, "There is always context." The tears stirred, uncertain, afraid to be first to doubt. Alex said, "I will speak to the ones beyond these walls." Vorlix's crest twitched, displeased by courage. The feeds widened and threw the chamber to every shore. The mask of justice shone brighter to hide the seams. The narrator followed Alex's voice as it crossed the dark like a flare. Alex said, "What you call order is fear in ceremonial robes." Vorlix said, "Order preserves life." The tears rippled with murmurs and quills and claws. Marcus Hale said, "He confuses pride with principle." Lena Ortiz looked at the floor and did not move. Elyra said, "Let him finish." The feed split to faces across the rim of space. Alex said, "Erase me, and you do not end us." The star blinked and the chamber did not. The first hairline doubt ran through the court like light under ice. The narrator returned to the cell where silence felt engineered. Alex Mercer remembered a kitchen window vibrating during shellfire. Alex said, "I counted seconds so my sister would not count screams." The tribunal replayed the blast without the faces it took. Lena Ortiz said, "Endurance does not erase the harm you caused." The line stung because it fit the court's rhythm. Alex pictured a photo bent at the corner and gone forever. Marcus Hale said, "We bargain for survival, not pride." The word pride tasted like rust to him. Elyra listened, as if the cell held two histories at once. Alex said, "I am still here because someone has to look back." The narrator followed the projector bloom as childhood returned in cruel clarity. A playground swung inside dust and sirens, too bright for truth. Alex said, "I broke my wrist and learned how fear teaches posture." Vorlix said, "Pain is not proof of worth." The court wanted clean equations for dirty days. Lena Ortiz said, "We are measured by what we prevent." He remembered a neighbor who kept singing over thunder. Marcus Hale said, "Your songs hid artillery." The accusation felt practiced. Elyra said, "Songs can also keep children breathing." Alex held the thread of that voice and would not let go. The narrator set the memory aside and let present breath reclaim the room. Alex said, "I am not a hero, and that matters." The feeds flinched, because humility made poor spectacle. Vorlix said, "Irrelevance is not defense." He stood straighter so his flaws did not apologize. Lena Ortiz said, "Humility will not move the seal." Marcus Hale said, "Confession without capitulation wastes time." He tasted the old caution that kept him alive in rubble. Elyra said, "Dignity under pressure is the shape of truth." Alex said, "I refuse to step on a fallen helmet, and that is all I have." The narrator let a different memory surface, one that hurt without spectacle. A winter stairwell smelled like soap and smoke, and cheap coffee. Alex said, "My mother hid passports in flour and prayed only for boring days." Vorlix said, "You valorize evasion." He felt the trap close, but did not step back. Lena Ortiz said, "We chase order because chaos kills quietly too." Marcus Hale said, "Order required your compliance." He remembered refusing an easy lie that would have saved a rank. Elyra said, "Order without mercy breeds deserts." Alex said, "I learned to carry water and share it, even with enemies." The narrator carried the court to the hinge between memory and vow. Alex said, "I am here because I survived what was meant to shrink me." Vorlix said, "Survival is not virtue." The tears murmured like weather behind glass. Lena Ortiz said, "Show restraint and this ends cleanly." He saw the broken door again, and the quiet after. Marcus Hale said, "Clean endings require surrender." Elyra said, "Clean endings often hide graves." Alex said, "I will not be small for your geometry." The chamber noted the sentence, and could not file it away. The narrator marked the moment the mosaic of crimes widened into a net. Vorlix said, "Observe the unedited ledger of your species." Alex Mercer watched flames repeat with cleaner edges each time. Lena Ortiz said, "These records satisfy the statute." A city collapsed without smoke, and he knew it had been polished. Marcus Hale said, "Abstraction prevents bias." The feeds trimmed faces that might complicate arithmetic. Elyra said, "Abstraction also erases witnesses." Alex said, "Show the screams and the hands that helped." The tears shifted as doubt found a seam. Vorlix said, "You provoke the gallery to disorder." The narrator felt the star pulse as if counting lies. The narrator guided the court through a siege that never happened that way. Vorlix said civilian corridors were targeted by design. Alex saw the map labels flicker like bad truth. Lena Ortiz said, "Cross sources confirm intent." He traced the path of a corridor that was actually a clinic. Marcus Hale said, "The label is functional for clarity." Elyra said, "Clarity cannot rename a hospital." Alex said, "I carried a child through that door." The gallery quieted as if walls remembered. Vorlix said, "Anecdote cannot outweigh record." The narrator noted that record had learned new words. The narrator tracked the moment collaboration stepped from shadow to stage. Marcus Hale said, "Human command authorized selective strikes." Alex remembered the coded brief he refused to sign. Lena Ortiz said, "Authorization bears your unit mark." He tasted ash from a paper he burned years ago. Vorlix said, "Forgery is a human art." Elyra said, "So is courage to refuse signature." Alex said, "My mark was copied by the ones who feared audits." The tears stirred like dry grass before lightning. "Oh?" Marcus Hale said, "Conspiracy is a convenient refuge." The narrator heard the lock click on a door inside the record. The narrator let the court taste the texture of curated horror. Vorlix said, "We proceed to composite atrocities." The screen stitched decades into a single wound. Lena Ortiz said, patterns reveal essence. Alex saw a soldier duplicated across 4 wars with different flags. Marcus Hale said, symbolic sampling accelerates comprehension. Elyra said, symbols steal names from graves. Alex said, leave them their faces. The tears bent forward, hungry and uncertain. Vorlix said, face or mask. The sun condemns. The narrator felt the chamber lean toward a cliff. The narrator followed a rumor that began to sound like architecture. Vorlix said, defense concludes with the calculus of risk. The numbers rose like walls. Lena Ortiz said, risk demands containment. Alex felt the word containment as a cage around a planet. Marcus Hale said, containment prevents recurrence. Elyra said, containment also preserves the lie. Alex said, your model needs us monstrous to justify your mask. The tears rippled as if a wind crossed vacuum. Vorlix said, you mistake rigor for fear. The narrator knew fear when it pretended to be math. The narrator set the chamber in silence before the new cruelty began. Vorlix said, the tribunal decrees ordeal in place of execution. Alex Mercer's shackles clicked open only to be replaced by heavier restraints. Lena Ortiz said, this proves humanity's frailty. The chamber lowered into a pit of stone and fire, carved for spectacle. Marcus Hale said, endure, and you still condemn your kind. Elyra whispered, survive, and truth finds daylight. Alex said, I will not give them my break. The star flickered outside, as though waiting to record either collapse or defiance. The narrator carried the ordeal into heat that bent vision. Alex said, I have walked fire before. The crowd leaned closer, hungry for collapse. Vorlix said, pain clarifies essence. The floor glowed and chains pulled tighter. Lena Ortiz said, this ends faster if you yield. Marcus Hale said, yielding spares dignity. Elyra said, yielding also surrenders truth. Alex remembered ash storms in ruined streets and stepped forward. His lungs burned, but his stride remained. The court whispered like wind in broken steel. The narrator turned to the next torment designed for breaking spirit. Vorlix said, kneel or perish beneath weight. Blocks of metal lowered from the ceiling like falling verdicts. Alex braced, arms shuddering but unyielding. Lena Ortiz said, even stone erodes. He thought of his father, lifting rubble from strangers' homes. Marcus Hale said, resistance is spectacle, not strength. Elyra said, strength is the refusal to vanish. Alex said, I am wait's witness, not its victim. The chamber trembled with each crash. The narrator described the moment betrayal wore a familiar face. Marcus Hale stepped closer, voice cutting. Marcus Hale said, you think this is trial, Alex. It is elimination dressed as ritual. Alex's breath caught at the familiarity. Lena Ortiz turned away, her silence sharper than words. Elyra said, you betrayed your kind for fear. Marcus Hale said, I chose survival, not fear. Alex said, no, you chose the mask. The tears erupted, some nodding, some recoiling. Vorlix said, enough, proceed. The star outside dimmed as though ashamed. The narrator caught the breath between torment and revelation. Alex said, this was never about justice. Marcus Hale smiled thinly. Marcus Hale said, it was always about fear. Elyra said, fear of what rises after ruin. Lena Ortiz whispered, fear can rule empires. Vorlix said, fear is irrelevant to judgment. Yet the chamber's silence betrayed unease. Alex said, then why do you need the mask? The gallery trembled, as if recognizing its reflection. The narrator felt the star flare once, brighter than before, as though it too resisted change. The narrator set the chamber in a silence that cracked like ice. Alex Mercer stood bloodied but upright, chains dragging sparks across obsidian. Vorlix said, you will kneel before judgment. Alex said, I will stand before the galaxy. The feed zoomed close, capturing sweat, cuts, and unbroken fire in his eyes. Lena Ortiz whispered, he is not pleading anymore. Marcus Hale said, defiance is not survival. Elyra said, defiance can become memory. Alex spoke louder, naming mothers burying sons and fathers, shielding daughters. The tears leaned forward, as though listening for the first time. The narrator carried Alex's voice into the gallery like a blade. Alex said, we are not beasts to be caged, but voices carried in scars. Vorlix's crest tilted as if the words disturbed ritual. Lena Ortiz said, the chamber wavers. Marcus Hale said, wavering is not justice. Elyra said, justice begins when lies falter. Alex spoke of soldiers who shielded strangers, of children who learned hope in rubble. The feeds streamed faces across worlds, some leaning closer, some recoiling. The tribunal's mask thinned. The narrator marked the crack as legacy broke into light. Elyra said, there is more within him than verdict allows. Vorlix said, you risk censure, dissenter. Alex said, I carry what you feared we would become. Marcus Hale sneered, an accident of birth is not destiny. Lena Ortiz whispered, blood remembers deeper than verdicts. Alex spoke of explorers lost beyond mapped stars, of voices carried in him like hidden fire. The crowd shifted, as if gravity tilted. The tribunal walls hummed with unease. The narrator followed the moment sacrifice lit the chamber. Guards moved toward Alex, weapons humming. Elyra stepped forward, her mantle glowing. Elyra said, if truth must be silenced, then silence me first. A strike lashed, and Elyra's body faltered. Alex said, no. Vorlix said, order must prevail. The tears gasped, and billions watched her fall. Lena Ortiz whispered, one axe shatters the mask. Marcus Hale muttered, fools trade lives for myths. Alex's chest heaved, rage and grief welding into one. The chamber pulsed with fire unseen before. The narrator carried Alex's roar into history. Alex said, we are not asking for mercy. We are demanding recognition. The feeds shook as voices across systems echoed. Vorlix said, this is insurrection. Marcus Hale said, this seals your fate. Lena Ortiz whispered, or changes everything. Elyra's sacrifice glowed like ember memory in every watcher's eyes. The tears erupted, some chanting for death, others for truth. Alex's chains rattled as if too small for his voice. The galaxy leaned toward flame, and fear no longer wore a mask. The narrator marked the instant judgment became spectacle. Magistrate Vorlix said, sentence is extermination, to be enacted now. The word now struck like a hammer against hollow steel. Alex Mercer felt chains bite as guards hauled him toward the execution dais. Lena Ortiz said, proceed under seal and silence. The crowd refused silence, and answered with a low thunder. Dr. Marcus Hale said, this restores equilibrium. The feeds bloomed across 1,000 worlds, and would not look away. Elyra's fallen form lay where courage had tried to interrupt ritual. Alex said, you fear us more than you judge us. Vorlix said, fear is not a factor. The gallery whispered that fear had already written the script. The narrator felt the blue star flare as if refusing to witness an erasure performed for order. The narrator followed the first fracture as protest became storm. A chant rose from the tears and bled into the feeds like dawn. Alex said, let the galaxy see the hand behind the mask. Vorlix said, mute the gallery. The controls flickered and refused command like guilty nerves. Lena Ortiz said, we are losing containment. Dr. Marcus Hale said, push the verdict seal to all relays. The relays returned a mirror full of riots and questions. Elyra had given them permission to doubt, and they used it. Alex said, truth survives in the open air. Vorlix said, order will be restored. The narrator counted the beats as worlds leaned forward, and none looked away. The narrator traced the revelation as a buried door swung wide. A whistle of data cut the chamber and became a voice without a face. The hidden architect said, the model required extinction to stabilize expansion. Vorlix froze as the confession painted the ceiling with guilt. Alex said, "There is your justice, wearing numbers like armor." Lena Ortiz said, "Authenticate the source." The signature bloomed with seals older than the court itself. Dr. Marcus Hale said, "Strategic necessity is not malice." The tears hissed because they knew the taste of malice disguised as math. Alex said, "You built a verdict to match your fear." The narrator felt the star dim, ashamed by what calculation had demanded. The narrator carried the backlash as order split along its seams. Vorlix said, "Adjourn for stabilizing protocol." The chamber refused adjournment and roared like weather. Alex said, "You cannot bury what the sky has already learned." Lena Ortiz said, "Suspend the sentence under inquiry." Dr. Marcus Hale said, "Suspension invites collapse." The feeds answered with names of the dead, stitched to the architect's chain. Vorlix said, "Silence." The word broke against the crowd and fell dull. Alex said, "This is not justice, this is fear wearing a mask." The mask cracked where Elyra's blood had dried. The narrator saw the court glimpse itself without costume and recoil. The narrator set the verdict's ashes beside a narrow door called future. Vorlix said, "Execution is stayed pending full inquiry." The roar became 1,000 breaths pulled at once. Alex said, "Life under watch is still life." Lena Ortiz said, "A moratorium will protect the worlds and spare the species." Dr. Marcus Hale said, "This concedes chaos the final word." The feeds replied with candles in windows and fists in air. Elyra seemed to lift inside every lens like a quiet star. Alex said, "You cannot erase us because you already carry us." Vorlix said, "Humanity will be monitored and bound by covenant law." The narrator felt the blue star steady as the chamber made room for a scar instead of a grave. The narrator opened on a chamber that felt smaller after the stay. The tears muttered like surf around stone. Magistrate Vorlix said, "Inquiry begins." Punishment paused. Alex Mercer stood with chains light but present. Lena Ortiz said, "We will audit the architect's devices." Dr. Marcus Hale said, "Audits placate mobs, not logic." The feeds showed worlds cooling from riot to watchfulness. Elyra's mantle glowed where attendants set a pale banner. Alex said, "Name the hands that tuned the evidence." Vorlix said, "Names will be found." The hall listened for a future. It did not trust yet. The narrator felt the star breathe, as if the dome had finally cracked enough to let air in. The narrator followed the data trail as it wound through hidden doors. Vorlix said, "Produce the custodians of record." Figures in gray stepped from the shadows like unfinished sentences. Lena Ortiz said, "Chain of custody breaks here." Alex said, "Who ordered the stitch between wars?" Dr. Marcus Hale said, "Symbolic montage is a lawful tool." The crowd hissed at lawful. A voice from the feeds read the architect's signature aloud. Vorlix said, "Seal these custodians." Alex felt the mask slide from the word justice, like bark from burned wood. The tears held their breath for the cut that would follow. The narrator marked the reckoning that did not feel like triumph. Vorlix said, "Humanity is spared extermination under covenant law." The declaration rang like metal, set down at last. Alex said, "A life on a leash is still a life." Lena Ortiz said, "We shape the leash into a path." Dr. Marcus Hale said, "Path or leash oversight remains." The feeds showed candles, banners, and faces wet with relief. Elyra's memory moved through the chamber like a quiet tide. Alex said, "We will answer for our harms and refuse your invented ones." Vorlix said, "So entered." The narrator tasted ash and honey together. The narrator carried the farewell. No one wished to speak. Alex stood before the mantle and let silence do the first work. Alex said, "You gave them permission to hear." The gallery bowed in waves. Lena Ortiz said, "Her dissent rewrote the chamber." Dr. Marcus Hale said, "Martyrdom distorts policy." Vorlix said, "Record her as dissenter of standing." The feeds lingered on Elyra's calm face beneath light. Alex said, "I will carry this debt in public." The tears answered with a sound that was not applause, and not prayer. The narrator watched memory take root where fear once lived. The narrator closed on a corridor of quiet engines and long shadows. The galaxy watched through 1,000 weary lenses. Vorlix said, "You leave under escort and under vow." Lena Ortiz said, "We will draft terms that do not erase the soul." Dr. Marcus Hale said, "Compliance will be absolute." Alex said they wanted a verdict. What they got was a warning. The words moved like current through the feeds. The chamber did not cheer. It listened. Alex walked as if the floor remembered every fall and rise. The star brightened and steadied. The narrator left the court with a line carved into orbit. Fear had worn a mask, and the mask had cracked.